What's up, guys? It's Alex Saint, aka Lord Saint, and today we're going to talk about my shade house. I'm going to start with just telling you guys a little bit of the story of how the shade house came to be. Let's kind of just set the geography of where we're at. I'm in Broward County, Florida, which is pretty much South Florida. If you're not from the area, you wouldn't know where Broward County is. But this initially started when I purchased this house maybe 4 years ago, and I was falling in love with plants. I was adamant I wanted a greenhouse. So my wife went out and bought me this Harbor Freight greenhouse, and I put it together, and it was about a 10 by 12 greenhouse. Put it in the corner of my yard, and I loved it. I stocked it with plants, and it was just this beautiful, appealing thing. In the mornings, I would open it up, having the humidifiers running, and it was just this beautiful, just dreamy space that I had for my plants out in the yard. Now, what I quickly began to realize after being told by many South Floridians that were heavy in the plant community was that be careful, you're gonna cook your plants. Summertime is not good for those type of structures. The panels of the greenhouse were like this, I forget what it's called, but it's like these plastic panels. But regardless, I stuck with it, and I started making improvement after improvement. I had to put fans in there. I had to put exhaust fan in there. I had to put a humidifier. Then it was an issue of watering the plants. Then it was iguanas getting into the greenhouse, and then now I couldn't get them out or couldn't find them because they were hidden behind so many things. And then maybe they were going to start munching on a few of their favorite treats. And I'm like, okay, this is getting to be a little too much. And then summer came, and in a matter of a day, I went out, bought some shade fabric, and I lined the top of my shade house with shade fabric because I was literally cooking plants on the inside. It was like I set it on broil mode, or bake if you will, and plants just started cooking in there. So I put the shade fabric over it, and the shade fabric did, a decent job, but the temperature was still so high in the greenhouse. And that's when I realized, okay, they were right. This was great while it lasted, but I think it's time to get rid of the greenhouse. But I wasn't gonna just let go of my dreams of having my plants all in one location outdoors, right? I had this decent sized yard, and I was like, I'm gonna use it. So I started doing some research, and I found slat houses or shade houses. Now, slat houses, I believe, were wood when I was looking them up, and I was like, is that really sustainable? For the long term, hurricane strength, is it gonna rot over time? It's South Florida, it's raining, it's humid. I need to figure out something else. So then I ran across a page, I guess it was an orchid business. And what they would do is they would build orchid structures. And these structures they appeared to be made out of metal pole, and people would hang their orchids, and it'd be just in the yard, direct sunlight, shade fabric, metal pole frame, and people would hang their orchids. And I'm like, okay, hold on, they're onto something. When I got the quote for a price for this structure, I was like, no, there's no way. It was over $1,000 for this 10 by 10 structure that I wanted at the time, just to fit, which this is the original behind me, the original portion that I wanted to fit this in. And I was like, there's no way I can build something like this. So I started the research. Now, my research obviously was I started looking on how they build their structure. Now, a lot of it looked like custom pieces that they were using, but I was sure that I could find some of those custom pieces. So this led to what you see behind you is the route from having a greenhouse to now a shade house. And when I say shade house, it's not any wood or anything. Like I said, it's literally fabric, shade fabric, and I'll show you guys. I'll run the whole thing through. I'll show you guys. But metal support beams that I used. let's talk about the frame of the shade house. The easiest thing that I could think of when I was looking up, several different materials to build this shade house was what lasts in South Florida. Is there anything in my yard that I can look around right now that is just outlasting the elements, which was the main concern here? Hurricanes, thunderstorms, summers. What's gonna last in South Florida? And immediately I looked at my chain link fence at the time. I had a 4-foot chain link fence, and I said, oh my gosh, top rail. So top rail is literally the top portion of if you've seen a chain link fence, I hope everybody here has seen a chain link fence, but it's the top rail portion of that chain link fence. It's the pole. That pole is generally about 1 3/8 in diameter. So it's a 1 3/8 pole. And I said, oh my gosh, we have fencing supply companies all over the place. I can use top rail to frame this. Top rail was strong. I know it withstands all the elements, the heat, the rain. If I put it in the ground, it should last as long as I need it to. If anything, my fabric would go before the top rail went. So I said, okay, I'm gonna build this out of top rail. The only issue I had was I couldn't find a company anywhere that had the joints that I would need to build just a basic rectangular or square shade house design. So I went to searching online, and I found a company called Trident Fence, and I forget where they're out of. They're not based in Florida, but Trident Fence sold these black joint pieces, and this was important because I needed a way to connect my top rail pieces together. I looked online and I ended up finding every single joint I needed, and I'll show you guys. You can probably see in this video right here at the top there's a black joint right there, and I will show you guys every single portion of this as we go. But I found the joints. So I said, all right, let me order these joints and let me see how this all fits. Obviously, I had to draw it all out. I had to make sure I had my measurements right. I needed to make sure I had as many joints as I needed. They had several joints, 4-way joints, 2-way joints. Think of, at the time, a carport. If you were to build yourself a carport, you would have different joints. Some of them are angled with four ends to them, but I needed something more 90-degree angle type, and that's what I ended up finding through Trident Fence. Trident Fence, and there were several other websites, but Trident Fence was the main one that I could find with reasonable pricing, and I didn't mind the black. So the initial framing is top rail, 1 3/8, and Trident Fence joints, obviously, that fit 1 3/8. And the good thing about the joints were you would slip the top rail on, and then you just screw a bolt in, and then it would hold them in place. And I think it's easily over a year now. I think we're going on 2 years since I built the original portion of the shade house, and it's withstood torrential downpours and inclement weather, and I have never had an issue so far with the materials I decided to use. All right, so I had the framing done. Now I had to figure out how I was gonna make this an actual shade house. The most important part, well, I think they're equally important, but this was an equally important part because how was I gonna grow plants in a climate where the sun literally just beats everything down? So I went out searching for shade fabric, and I found a company locally that did custom shade fabric. Now that company no longer exists, but if anybody in South Florida is looking for shade fabric, comment down below and I will get some information to you from a source that I have that still sells the shade fabric if you want it locally, so South Florida. Outside of that, you can run a search online, and you can go anywhere, Amazon, or just run a generic search, and there are plenty of garden type websites that sell shade fabric, custom shade fabric to order. So initially, I was thinking, okay, I'm gonna go 50% shade fabric. I'm splitting the sun in 50%. That should be more than enough to get the job done here. Excuse me. Last video, I realized while I was watching the video, I was dying from the sun and sweat while I was shooting it. So I brought out my favorite rag at the moment, Go Panthers, to wipe my face periodically in this video. Back to business. My shameless Panthers plug, Go Panthers. So I was thinking, okay, 50% shade fabric should be more than adequate to grow philodendron, which I was really into at the time, Monstera, Syngonium, some of the generic stuff that I was really just into at the moment. So I'm like, okay, 50% should be just fine. At the time, I had a good friend of mine who I consider, a plant mentor. He taught me a lot about the plants at the time. He was an OG in the plant game, been doing it for years, 30 years plus. So I got into a conversation with him, and he was actually getting a structure built. And I asked him, hey, what shade fabric are you using? And he said upwards of 70, so 73%. And I'm like, oh my God, I was gonna go 50. He goes, if you go 50, you're going to lose everything. 50% is not enough to cut the South Florida UV rays in the sun. And I was like, oh my God, thank God I was gonna buy 50% shade fabric. So if you're in South Florida, and some of you in South Florida have asked me that you wanna, or have mentioned that you wanna build the same structure, stay away from the 50%. I'm gonna tell you another reason why you're gonna stay away from the 50%, and from experience. So I opted in for the 73% shade fabric. And I've had 73%, which you can see behind us. I've had that in there since I built the structure, and I have 73% all the way through on the top of my shade structure. And it has been incredible. 73% has been great. What I didn't consider was that on the side, which is where I'm standing right here, the east facing, if you will, portion of the shade house, I had nothing to block the sun. So now I ran into, okay, how do I protect my plants from that morning to 1 to 2 o'clock sun? How do I protect them? So I came up with this design of curtains, and I was like, oh no, there's no way I'm gonna order another set of shade fabric just for the side. So I went to Harbor Freight, and I think they had like 50% shade fabric. Here's where the 50% comes into play. I installed 50% shade fabric on the side where you're seeing here. Normally there would be. We're gonna get to why there's no longer a curtain here at the closer to the end of the video. But I installed curtains on the side. I rigged it however I could, and the curtains worked great, or so I thought, until summer came by and that morning to afternoon sun hitting that side was just eating right through the 50% fabric. Now, the plants were generally okay. They were doing fine, generally. It's really when I got to midsummer and my collection started growing, and I had to move plants closer to the edge of the shade house, the eastern portion of the shade house, that now I had foliage maybe touching or just like maybe inches away from the curtain, that now I realized the sun was beating through and just scorching those plants. So I've had that 50% for a long time. It's not until recent, and when I say recent, I mean last week. So think of a 2-year-old shade house, and last week I decided, okay, I have to do something about this because I'm losing plants that are positioned closely to the eastern portion, or maybe I'm not losing plants, but I'm getting noticeable foliage damage. That's where the 50% portion comes in, where I say stay away from 50% if you're in South Florida. If anything, 73% and up. The higher the percentage, the more shade you have. The lower, obviously, the less shade you have. The weaving is different on the shade fabric. As far as what color shade fabric, I went with black. Now, I'm sure there's white, there's tan, there's different types of shade fabric you're using. Mine is this is what it looks like. You can see right through it. This is a black shade fabric, and it has grommets on it. Anything you order, try to order grommets on it. The grommets are important because how do you think you're going to attach this fabric to your structure? Now, you could use regular zip ties, but again, if your shade house is outdoors, which I'm assuming everyone that's building a shade house, they have it outdoors, and you have the elements, the sun, high humidity or anything like that, or cold. You can't expect the normal zip ties, which are plastic zip ties, to withstand the elements. So you have to get metal zip ties, and metal zip ties will literally cinch down. You can get them on Amazon. I actually recommend you get them on Amazon. If you go to your hardware store, I think the last time I looked them up for my improvements, it was like 10 metal 11-inch zip ties for $10. When on Amazon, I got 100 metal zip ties for $10. So what gives, right? I will link the metal zip ties down below. I will link everything down below that I've used to make any improvements out here in the shade house. So you don't have to worry about taking notes or anything. I will link it all below, and then you can always ask me in the comments and I will clarify anything that isn't clear to you at the time. Now, if you wonder how I water my plants out here in the shade house, I rigged the zone in my sprinkler system to water the plants automatically. Now, the issue that I had with this was that every day that I was gonna water plants, I had to come out here and open the curtains, allow the sprinkler system to do its thing. And before you ask, I'm pulling off of a canal out of the back of the house here. Every time I would water the plants, I would have to open the curtains, and then when that was done, I would have to close them. And let's say I was running late for work or something and I forgot, then that sun would touch those plants and I'd be left with whatever I was left with at the end of my work day when I got back home. So that was an issue that I ate it and I dealt with it for a long time. Opening, closing the shade house, opening, closing the shade house. It just wasn't convenient for me. And as I got busier, sometimes I would just leave the curtains closed and the water would just punch through the shade fabric, and whatever got water, got water. So with that, I installed a misting system and I tapped in to the sprinkler heads. So all I had to do was I removed one of the sprinkler heads and I bought these orbit valves from Home Depot. And these orbit valves allowed you to connect 8 or less, depending on the valve you got, and I'll show you the hose. It would allow you to connect a hose about this size, right, to the valve or the manifold, and then you'd have these heads that would emit water. Now, some of them look like this, some of them are more mister type where they'd shoot in a direction. So that took care of a lot of the plants on the inside, and then the sprinkler head would do the deep watering that I needed from the outside. And there's 2 sprinkler heads that obviously they touch each other at one point and they cover the entire area that the plants are in. And then I have these types of little mini tube heads that emit water whenever the sprinkler system is running at the same time. So everything should be able to get watered at some way or another, in addition to the South Florida rain that we have here. So an orbit manifold system with these with tubing. I don't think it's orbit, but it's normal tubing, and this can be used for several things, like a drip line or anything like that you want to run. But I used it for misting and sprayer features connected to a manifold or a orbit sprinkler head type that would just shoot water strictly for this. So I dedicated 1 to 2 sprinkler heads directly to tubing like this to emit water at different times throughout the shade house. Okay, I'm tired of the curtains. I'm running out of time. I kind of want to expand the area, not necessarily for total utilization to put more plants, but for shade. Anytime I would come out here to work on, or just to do anything with the plants, whether I was repotting, I was, cutting back, whether I was just sitting out here, I had to have I'd had to jump into the curtain and be out there. But if I didn't have space over there to do whatever task I needed to, I'd have to be out in the sun, which is between the house and the shade house. I would have to stand in the sun and take care of it there. And I was like, okay, there's got to be a way that I can add to the shade house, but cross it straight over to the house. And I was like, you know what? I know the answer. I know what the answer is. And I don't know why I didn't do this a long time ago. I'm just going to attach another piece of shade fabric from the shade house structure, from the original frame that we had, to the house. And I would just use fisheye screws into the house and use those grommets. And I would think of some type of tie system to attach it to the house. And literally I'm standing here in this area where you can see 80% this time, 80% shade fabric. Now, if you're asking why I went 80%, the goal for me is to add an area of my shade house for anthurium. Why that didn't work before, it just got too sunny. The shade fabric I was using, the sun was just a little too harsh. It wasn't cool enough out here, and the anthurium were paying for it. So I went 80% this time to really just to test almost what 80% would feel like in the middle of the day. And if there's a decent breeze, it is noticeably cooler under the 80% shade fabric. Noticeable enough where I'm like, oh yeah, anthurium can easily deal with this. My wife would come out from my office area, which I have a door that leads directly to the shade house, and she would be like, oh, I forgot you put this fabric out there. I thought it was an overcast day. And I said, bingo, that's the goal for all this, that or for that recent addition. I wanted it to be enough doppled sun for us to still get the sun, but doppled sunlight that it felt better than the 70% to kind of gauge what I needed to do for anthurium to survive under this portion, which is the 80% portion. So what I'm gonna do is I'm probably going to cut up that same shade fabric I brought you, which was about 50%. I'm going to try to cut that into maybe 3 strips. This is the original shade house is about 10 feet wide, and I'm gonna try maybe 2 to 3 foot strips, the length of it, and I'm going to just install a double layer underneath or beneath the already existing 73% shade fabric. So what that's gonna do, it's gonna give me maybe 3 sections where it's just the additional 70 plus 50% shade, and that'll allow the sun as it moves to, you know, kind of get let the 73% do what it does. But in those spots, it'll have the extra shade area, and I think that will suffice in keeping the anthurium safe, at least from the sun, because that's really the battle that I face. Now, do I wish I added 80% throughout the whole thing at the beginning? I do. I think the philodendron have just eaten this up. You can see an epipremnum right behind me. If you're gonna ask what this is, I always have to look, but it's a Taruna Carnival top cut, and I got this at IAS maybe 2 years back. Originally I had it trailing, and then if you've been following me long enough, you know that I like to kind of do giant things with foliage. So this is what it's done, and it is just beautiful. I think at 80%, majority of the plants wouldn't really see a difference. They do just fine. So I do wish that I did 80% for the total of, or the entirety of the shade house. So if you are doing this, I mean, it's up to you. You're not gonna go wrong with 73%, but 80% to me is just that much better, and I wouldn't have to make additional improvements to house anthurium. Now you're probably wondering, no, and would anthurium be fine in the 73%? Yeah, I honestly, I do think so. I think they would be fine in the 73%. But for your dark anthurium with certain features, like, you know, you want to get those darker colors, the darker it is, the better it is, if that makes sense. You bring out more of the rich tones of the foliage when you can just have it in a nice, perfect setting, but still allow some sun to kiss in and for the ambient light to really help to grow the anthurium. So I do wish I had that, but like I said, where there's a will, there's a way. There is a way for me to make the improvements for me to house the anthurium, so I'm not worried about that. But I am collecting a lot of anthurium now, and they are growing. I do have some big boys that are growing rather quickly, and I'm running out of space in my patio area where I have majority of them, and I need to move them out here. And outdoor growing is just a different beast for anthurium in general. Well, the watering, you know, chunky mix, which I talked about in the last video, and all this stuff. Everything just kind of has to be right, especially with the heat down here in South Florida. That's the main concern. I don't have a fan running out here, so I have to rely on the breeze and enough shade to keep the anthurium happy. That is where we're at with new additions. The whole side of this house, or of my home on the, I guess we'll call it the western portion, where my wife has allowed me to have this beautiful shade house structure, has now gone from being a 10 by 10 originally to a 35 by 10 to now I've added 12, let's say 12 feet of shade. It's literally connected pretty much to the house now. And then I have string lights that are running the length of it. So it's comfortable now. I can sit out here, I can put a hammock, I can sit and do work, I can repot, I can take care of all the chores right here under the entirety of this, and it just covers the whole side of the house. I hope I answered everyone's question on that. There were some people with questions of what shade fabric, where I'm getting the stuff. Everything will be linked down below in the bio. That's about all. I mean, I don't have to worry about all the minor nuisances I had before. This is just kind of an open area now to house my plants. Things we do for our plants, right? The things we do for anthurium, which is why I really started kicking all this up. That's my shade house. Soon I will have to take you guys on a tour of the shade house when I get it all cleaned up. It's a bit, and when I say a bit messy, it's very messy right now. I'm currently chopping philodendron down, and a lot of stuff that I had for several years that just reached the top. I'm chopping those and you know, getting rid of those to make space. And then we have to order benches to put the anthurium on and all that good stuff. So it's a work in progress, but as soon as that is done, I promise I'm going to take you guys on a tour out here. There's a little bit of a lot from Hoya to alocasia to, I've still got philodendron. I'm not giving up on philodendron. I just, some that stopped sparking joy, I decided I was gonna get rid of them. And then I have, you know, some gems like this that not too many people have that I'm holding on to. So I still have those hanging plants out here. Oh, I didn't tell you guys. You watch my video, you're probably looking back here and you're looking at wood poles, wood hosts that plants are on. Even if you're looking at this epi right here, you're looking at a wood host that it's on. And you're probably thinking, what the heck, or what, how's that upright? I have a video dedicated to how growing on wood posts and how I attach them into my shade house. I use a hook system where they're literally dangling off of the ground. And I used wood because in South Florida, I want to make this clear before everybody challenges me, no, you need a moss pole, you need this. Listen, I tried a moss pole. It just didn't work for me. You can watch the video. It introduced, I couldn't get rid of pests fast enough, and then the moss would break down, and it was too much building these moss poles. And I said, you know, my mentor was like, hey, go get wood. You're in South Florida, kid. These plants will grow on the side of your house if you let them. And he was absolutely right. Everything is growing now on wood poles, and I trained them up, and they're just on these 1x2 wood strips that I'm using, and you can use any size you'd like. Larger plants, you can use a 2x4. If you want to use a 1x4, 1x3, you can use whatever you like based on the plant you like. But I do have that video. You can check that video out. I'll probably tag it at the end of this so you can see a little bit of both the initial shade house video and that video. But that's my shade house. If you have any questions, please drop a comment below. I'm here to help you guys with this shade house build. I did build it. I had minor help from my wife, but I pretty much did it alone. So if I can do it alone, you can do it too. I'm here to answer any questions you can have. If you found this video informative and you want more of the shade house when it's ready, drop a comment down below. Let me know what you want to know, and I will try to dedicate a video to your topic. If you're new to the page, I'm Lord Saint. Thank you for stopping by. Again, I did promise that I was going to continue to drop these videos for you guys, and as promised, I'm here with the shade house video. But thank you for watching. Thank you for spending your time with me. Subscribe to the channel, comment down below, drop a like, and I'll see you guys on the next one. Go Panthers.